What if I told you the FBI didn't just work with the mob? They literally became the mob. Meet James Whitey Bulger, Boston's most feared crime boss. For 20 years, he terrorized the city, murdered 19 people, and ran a criminal empire worth millions. But the FBI wasn't hunting him. They were protecting him. For 20 years, FBI agent John Connolly took $235,000 in bribes, warned Bulger about raids, and even helped him murder witnesses. This is a story of America's most corrupt law enforcement scandal. Was the FBI really fighting organized crime, or just better at it? By 1975, Whitey Bulger had already carved his name into Boston's underworld with a knife dipped in blood. Head of the Winter Hill Gang, he ran South Boston like his personal kingdom. Loan sharking, extortion, murder. The man had a resume that would make Satan blush. At least 19 bodies would eventually be tied to him, though the real number? Probably higher. Bodies have a way of disappearing when you control the docks. But our story takes an interesting turn, because in September 1975, a fresh-faced FBI agent named John Connolly walked into Whitey's life with an offer that shouldn't have existed. See, Connolly wasn't just any agent. He grew up in the same South Boston housing projects as Whitey. They knew each other as kids. And now, decades later, Connolly had a proposition that would change everything. The FBI was obsessed, and I mean obsessed, with crushing the Italian mafia. La Cosa Nostra was their white whale, their ticket to glory, their path to bigger budgets and better headlines. The Irish mob? They saw them as small potatoes, a manageable ally. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. Connolly's pitch was pretty simple. Become a top echelon informant. Help us take down the Italians, and we'll look the other way on your activities. It was like offering a fox a job guarding the henhouse, then acting surprised when chickens started disappearing. The FBI thought they were being clever, playing three-dimensional chess, while everyone else played checkers. They'd use the Irish to destroy the Italians, then clean up the Irish later. Nice and tidy. Except there's the thing about making deals with devils. They're usually better at contracts than you are. But instead of the FBI using Bulger, it was Bulger using the FBI. Let me tell you about Michael Donahue, family man, 3 kids. His biggest crime was being in the wrong car at the wrong time. May 11th, 1982. Donahue's giving a ride home to his drinking buddy Brian Halloran. What Donahue doesn't know is that Halloran just became an FBI informant. What Donahue really doesn't know is that John Connolly just picked up the phone and called Whitey Bulger to tell him exactly where Halloran would be. The bullets that tore through the car on Northern Avenue didn't just kill 2 men. They killed whatever was left of the FBI's integrity in Boston. See, Connolly wasn't just protecting Bulger, he was feeding him a buffet of information. Names of informants, pending indictments, locations of witnesses. It was like giving a shark a GPS tracker for every swimmer in the ocean. And his boss, John Morris, was in on it too. Taking cash, accepting cases of wine, looking the other way while bodies piled up like cordwood. Bulger knew exactly what he was doing. Years later, he'd brag about it. No one would dare believe that he was an informant. It would be too incredible. And he was right. Who'd believe that America's most prestigious law enforcement agency was running interference for a serial killer? Every time someone got too close to Bulger's operation, they'd get a visit. Not from Whitey's boys, from the FBI. The higher his body count grew, the more untouchable he became. The Winter Hill Gang had their fingers in everything. Gambling operations that pulled in millions. Drug trafficking that flooded South Boston with cocaine. Ironic considering Whitey claimed to hate drugs. Loan sharking with interest rates that would make a credit card company weep with envy. One businessman who couldn't pay? They found him in the trunk of a car. Another guy who tried to compete, fed to the fishes, literally. But Whitey wasn't content being king of Boston. The man was shipping weapons to the IRA in Northern Ireland. Machine guns, explosives, enough firepower to wage a small war. International arms dealer, domestic terrorist, serial killer, and the FBI's favorite snitch. It's like a bad joke, except nobody's laughing. At his peak, Whitey Bulger was worth between $30 million and $50 million. $50 million. That's not street thug money. The economics are actually fascinating in a horrifying way. The FBI essentially subsidized organized crime. By eliminating Whitey's competition, the Italian mob, they created a monopoly. And what happens with monopolies? Prices go up, violence goes up, control becomes absolute. South Boston didn't have a crime problem. It had a Whitey Bulger problem. By the 1990s, even other law enforcement agencies realized something smelled rotten inside the FBI. The Massachusetts State Police started noticing something strange. The FBI put a higher priority on protecting their informants than they did actually looking at public safety, Foley said. Every time they got close to busting Whitey Bulger, their investigations would mysteriously fall apart. Witnesses would vanish. Evidence would disappear. Wiretaps would come up empty because somehow, Bulger always knew they were listening. Thomas Foley, retired head of the Massachusetts State Police, said his investigations were consistently undercut by a Federal Bureau of Investigation and a U.S. Department of Justice that had no inclination to rein in Bulger or his top brass. The DEA noticed too. So they did something unprecedented. They cut the FBI out entirely, started running investigations without telling the feds. When multiple law enforcement agencies were actively avoiding the FBI because they think it's corrupt, you've got a problem that goes way beyond one bad apple. December 23, 1994. A federal indictment is coming down with Whitey Bulger's name on it. Racketeering, extortion, murder. The whole catalog of sins finally packaged with a bow. But guess who makes a phone call? John Connolly, playing guardian angel, warns Whitey one last time. And just like that, poof, Whitey Bulger vanishes like smoke. The FBI's most protected killer becomes the FBI's most wanted fugitive. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife, probably one of Whitey's. For 16 years, this man lived on the run. 16 years. He made it to number 2 on the FBI's most wanted list, right behind Osama bin Laden. Just think about that. A terrorist who killed thousands of Americans. And a gangster the FBI created. Both equally wanted, both equally protected in their own ways. But the real betrayal wasn't that Bulger ran. It was who let him run. June 22, 2011, Santa Monica, California. An elderly couple has been living quietly in a rent-controlled apartment near the beach. Charlie and Carol Gasco, the neighbors knew them as. Nice people. Kept to themselves, fed stray cats, paid rent in cash. The FBI raids the apartment and finds $822,000 in cash hidden in the walls, 30 firearms, fake IDs, and 2 of America's most wanted fugitives, Whitey Bulger and his girlfriend, Catherine Grieg. The old man who fed cats was the same monster who'd strangled women with his bare hands. The 2013 trial was supposed to be about justice. Instead, it became the FBI's public humiliation. Every day brought new revelations about how deep the corruption went. Witnesses described murders committed while Bulger was supposedly helping the FBI. Families of victims sat in that courtroom learning that their loved ones died not despite law enforcement, but because of it. You want to know the moment that captured it all? Stephen, the rifleman Flemmy, Whitey's old partner, is on the stand. He's describing a murder, casual as discussing the weather. Suddenly from the gallery, someone shouts, "You're a fucking liar." It's Patricia Donahue, widow of Michael Donahue, that innocent man killed in 1982. That's decades of betrayal boiling over. Decades of being told the system would protect you, only to learn the system was protecting your family's killer. 11 murders. That's what they convicted him of. 11 out of 19 they charged him with. The other 8, not enough evidence. Convenient, considering the FBI had been destroying evidence for years. Life in prison plus 5 years. Like the extra 5 matters when you're 84 years old. Interestingly, the FBI's informant obsession was never about justice. It was all about numbers. Arrests, convictions, statistics they could show Congress to justify bigger budgets. They turned law enforcement into a profit center where the currency was arrests and the collateral damage was bodies. Protecting Whitey Bulger made sense on a spreadsheet. More Italian mob arrests equals more funding equals more power. Who cares about a few dead Irish gangsters and their innocent victims? The FBI did the math and decided murder was an acceptable operating cost. But if you think the FBI cleaned up after this disaster, think again. John Connolly, the golden boy FBI agent who grew up with Whitey, convicted of racketeering, obstruction of justice, and murder charges. 40 years in prison. He's still there, probably wondering if those envelopes full of cash were worth it. His supervisor, John Morris, was granted immunity from prosecution in exchange for testimony. Because even corruption has a hierarchy, and someone had to tell the story. But Connolly wasn't alone. The investigation revealed a network of corruption that ran through the Boston FBI office like cancer. Agents taking bribes. Agents at Christmas parties with known killers. Agents literally having dinner with the same criminals they were supposed to be investigating. It wasn't a few bad apples, oh no. It was a rotten orchard. The FBI's response? New rules. 28 pages of new guidelines for handling informants. So many restrictions that agents complained they couldn't do their jobs anymore. Which is hilarious, really. We can't fight crime unless we're allowed to enable it. That's essentially what they were saying. The new rules required approval from supervisors for any informant meeting, written report for every interaction, review boards and oversight committees, and enough paperwork to bury a small building. But we all know rules only work if people follow them, and the FBI had just spent 30 years proving they couldn't be trusted with their own guidelines. The economic reality is really dark. Informants aren't people to the FBI, they're assets, like stocks in a portfolio. Some pay dividends in arrests, some are long-term investments, and some, like Whitey Bulger, are toxic assets that poison everything they touch. But when your entire performance review is based on how many arrests you make, not how many innocents you protect, the math becomes simple. One protected killer who gives you 50 arrests is more than 50 honest investigations. It's cost-benefit analysis with blood as a variable. Finally came the final twist, Bulger's fate behind bars. October 30th, 2018. Whitey Bulger, now 89 years old, arrives at USP Hazleton in West Virginia, which houses 1,385 inmates. Maximum security federal prison, the kind of place where they send the worst of the worst. Bulger was severely beaten by one or more of his fellow inmates shortly after arriving at the prison. This wasn't just murder, it was a message written in blood and bone. The suspect was Fotios Freddy Gias, a mob hitman with ties to the Genovese crime family, the same Italian mafia Whitey had spent decades helping the FBI destroy. Paul De Calogero, another Boston mobster who knew exactly what Whitey was. The admissions were from Paulie that he and Freddy used a belt with a lock attached to it to beat Mr. Bulger to death. The beautiful, terrible irony? The FBI's protection had finally run out. No more phone calls, warning of danger. No more agents running interference. Just an old man in a wheelchair, alone with his enemies. The same kind of alone his victims had been when he came for them. Maybe it was incompetence. Maybe it was one last favor to make a problem go away. Either way, Whitey Bulger died like he lived, surrounded by corruption and violence. But even in death, the scandal wouldn't end. Of course, the scariest part of the story is that the FBI knew. They all knew. They knew they were protecting a serial killer. And they did it anyway because the arithmetic worked out in their favor. The families of Whitey Bulger's victims waited decades for justice, only to learn that justice itself had been corrupt. Imagine finding out that your father, your brother, your son died not because law enforcement failed to protect them, but because law enforcement chose not to. That's not a failure of the system. That's the system working exactly as designed. The FBI would like you to believe they've reformed. New rules, new oversight, new promises that this will never happen again. But institutions don't change their DNA that easily. The same pressures that created Whitey Bulger still exist. The same ambitions, the same politics, the same spreadsheet mortality that says 50 arrests justify 5 murders. If the FBI could protect Whitey Bulger, who else could they be protecting right now? They created Whitey Bulger, protected him, enabled him, and then when the heat got too much, they let him die in a prison corridor, beaten to death like an animal. No justice, just another crime to add to the pile. The FBI's mob cover-up isn't history, it's precedent, and that should terrify you.